All right, so this is the fourth video lecture in the chapter of socialization. The last video lecture, we talked about the different theories of socialization, which, as I mentioned then, psychologists, in psychology, we'll talk about some of the same people, but we'll talk about it in the context of personality, and really both of those have very similar definitions. These are socialization is the internalization of patterns of behaviors and thoughts, and the way that we interact with the world. And of course, depending on what social groups you belong to, in other words, are you male or are you female? There's even an argument that different racial groups socialize children differently. Are you Christian or Muslim or American or whatever? That the messages of what you are internalizing is distinctive, right? So the socialization, the internalization of society, or I think it said in the last slide, the social construction of the self. So again, there's a lot of overlap between the two social sciences. The self is defined as how we think about, like our when we think about ourself, right? Anyway, so the social construction, which means even my concept of who I am is determined by society. And I think I mentioned that in another chapter where I suggested that that we have no identity in the absence of people, that all of our identities are in relation to others. So for instance, I am a wife only because I have a relation with another person who I claim to be my husband. I am a mother because I have a relationship with people who I call my children. I am a colleague because I have relations with others in the same part of the social structure that I call my job. I'm a teacher because of you, student, right? We have a social relationship. Okay, so another important thing to talk about when we talk about socialization is the idea of emotions. And I know this may seem like, what do you mean emotions are biological? They are natural. In the psychology class, I would certainly be talking about the biology of emotions, but in the sociology class, I want to talk about how emotions are what we call a social construct. It is true, we will accept, let's acknowledge that there is a physiological aspect to emotions. And again, in psych, I'm going to be focusing on that part, but here I want to be focusing on the expression of emotions, the behavioral part, which is a social phenomena, the labeling, the acceptance of how we in our culture consider some emotions acceptable, some emotions are good, other emotions are considered bad. That's all decided by society. The physiological side just says our bodies react to social stimulus, but it's society that says, oh, being angry is bad and this is how you're supposed to act, right? Or says that there's a certain way that boys are supposed to act, they're supposed to emote, or girls, that there are gender differences, there's social class differences in our expression of emotions, and even the words that we give to emotions, even that's socially constructed. And examples of that is how that there are different, how over time, where biological feeling states are given different words. For instance, well, let me back up. Let me talk about gender. So if we were all together, I would be asking you, I'll tell you the story. Okay, so imagine that you have two girls and two boys, and they are in the parking lot fighting. Right, they're duking it out. Now, I've never done this. I don't know. I've never tested this hypothesis, but someone calls the police. Who do you think the police would break up first? When I ask a class this, usually they say, oh, they probably break up the boys first, right? Usually. Sometimes there'll be students who think they'll break up the girls, but again, I've never tested it, I don't know. But usually we say they break up the boys first. Now imagine that you have two girls and two boys, and they're in the commons, and they're hugging. Of course, you're not doing that right now because of COVID, but they're embracing. Which are you likely to see? Which are you not likely to see? Usually students say that they're more likely to see two girls hugging than they are to see two boys hugging. Boys do that bro hug, they bounce on the shoulders. Now imagine you have opposite ends of the campus, and you have a woman over here and she's sobbing, and you have a guy over here and he's sobbing. Which one? You don't like either one of them really, but which one are you more likely to see? You're probably more likely to see the girl. So you have a pattern here. You have girls are going to be allowed to fight each other, girls are going to be allowed to embrace, and girls are going to be allowed to sob, right? What does that tell us about the rules about emotional expression? Now, the research tells us when you plug boys and girls up to the machines, their bodies respond the same to emotional stimulus. Heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, right? Galvanic skin response. Physiologically, our bodies are responding the same. What's different is the expression, right? There are rules about how boys get to act and how girls get to act in response to these physiological changes, right? Those are the gender rules. There's class differences as well. Lower class people, poorer people, less educated people tend to be louder, more boisterous in their emotional expression. Very wealthy people, right? Like royalty, think about royalty or high society people, they're much more subdued and they're much less likely to even show emotional expression. All you gotta do is watch a documentary on the royals and you'll see that Queen Elizabeth, she hardly ever expresses any emotion. But watch, I don't know, watch NASCAR or something, there's all kinds of emotional expression going on. People are very loud. And religion is interesting because sociologically, religion is an emotional experience. And you can see these class differences certainly in religious expressions, right? So take, for example, and some churches have a history of having a lot more wealth than other churches. So those are often called high churches. And I don't know that there's a low church, but there's high churches, right? This would be churches like Catholic churches, Presbyterian, I don't know about Presbyterian, Episcopalian, the churches that are maybe Lutheran, I don't know. But these are, so I don't know if you learned this as a kid, but here's the steeple and here are the people. You ever learn that? Here's the people and here's the steeple. The steeple is built by the people. So you can tell to some degree the wealth of the people by the steeple. So if you go by, say, a Episcopalian church, right? They're usually very elaborate churches. I can say this true about Presbyterians, at least where I live. They're usually elaborate. They're quite. They're quite. What's the word I'm looking for? But anyway, it costs a lot of money, right? On the other hand, if you go by, say, maybe a Pentecostal church, or maybe, I'm trying to think of another example, or maybe a vineyard church, right? In some cases, they're metal buildings, right? In a Episcopalian church starts a high church. It starts at 10:45. It gets out at 11:45. There's some stand up. There's some sit down. There's some speaking back. Maybe a little bit of chanting. You shake the hands and you go on your way. Right? It's very ritualized. It's very controlled emotional expression. However, if you go to a church where in a metal building, you can probably hear it down the street. It begins sometime around 9:30. It goes until the Holy Spirit is done moving us. There's a lot of drumming. There's a lot of clapping. There's a lot of hallelujah. It's a very different emotional expression. And that's all I'm trying to say here is that emotional expression, not the physiology piece, but the way that we show it and what's acceptable to show. There are rules, and some of those rules are determined by the group, your gender group, your class group, and even your religion group. Well, and think about rank in terms of who you can emote to, right? There's rules, and usually the group that gets to decide how you emote is the more powerful, right? In other words, your boss can yell at you, but you can't yell at your boss, right? The parent can yell at the child, but in some households, the child is not allowed to yell at the parent. The teacher, like the student, can yell at the teacher, but that student had better not. No, did I say that wrong? The teacher can yell at the student, but the student can't yell at the teacher. Right? There are rules about how we emote, and so then we have to learn this. We have to learn, one, we have to learn what our emotions are, right? This is sometimes called emotional intelligence. And actually, emotional intelligence is more than just knowing what your emotions are. They're recognizing them, knowing yours, and being able to read somebody else's, right? And there's not really classes in emotional intelligence. So we have to learn, right? When our kindergarten teacher says to us, Tommy, I know you're angry, but you don't get to hit. What she's saying is she's labeling, she's telling Tommy what the emotion is, and she's explaining to him what's the appropriate expression. So even things like when your parents maybe say, big boys don't cry, they use their words. Their parents are teaching, they're socializing you into your emotional expression. They're telling you what the rules about your emotional expression are for your group to be a boy. And they're saying big boys. So if you're a little boy, right, the rules might be different. But in your group, in the group you want to be in, which would be a big boy, you're told you're supposed to. And even like this is what we do when we go to therapy. When we go to therapy and we talk about our problems, the therapist says, well, it sounds to me like you're feeling, and they're helping us label our emotions. And it's amazing. Labeling things is so important in our culture. We feel so much better just by knowing that, oh, I'm feeling sad or whatever. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I hope that made some sense and wrap this one up. And the next one, we'll talk about the agents of socialization.